What is up, guys? Rick Kakis here, and today we are going to be discussing armor within the Division 2. Now, the Division's armor system is pretty complex. We've got a bunch of stats, a bunch of talents, and even branding set bonuses to all keep track of, and therefore a lot of people are wondering, what is the best armor for my build? What armor perks, what armor stats should I be looking for? Should I be prioritizing? Well, those are the things this video aims to answer, to help you guys figure out what armor is going to give you the largest benefit in-game. And so, let's get started. But just before we do, if you're looking for some sick new headphones, I've partnered with ASTRO, so check the link in the description down below. Clicking it is going to automatically apply a code, allowing you to save some money and help the channel out. Definition of a win-win. Alright, now let's start here with a big generality about armor. So armor can spawn kind of in two different SKUs. You can get armor that has a ton of different stats, up to 4, but that armor will actually spawn with no perks. However, on the opposite end of the spectrum, you can get armor spawning with multiple perks, but not too many stats, like all the way down to 2, sometimes 1, depending on the piece of armor. But then you've got another factor, mod slots. Usually armor spawns with 1 mod slot, but sometimes it can spawn with 2, usually by taking out a stat. So an armor piece with 2 perks and 2 mod slots will likely only have 2 stats, we can see here from this backpack. Although mods are beneficial, and we'll go over them in more detail later, they don't usually provide bonuses as large as the ones you get from the stat lines, so I would prefer 1 mod slot and then more stat lines. In my opinion, the armor you're looking for has 1 perk and then the rest stats. The stats can greatly affect your build, they can be huge values, but some of the perks are still very good. However, another generality, when it comes to perks, there's 2 different kinds. Firstly, passive perks. These are things that are always up, and they're pretty simple things like plus 10% to overall armor. And you'll always have that active as long as you have that piece of armor equipped. However, you also have active perks. Now these are going to require a certain amount of points of your build to be invested in either your health and armor, your damage output, or your skills. So sometimes you're going to see a perk that requires 4 or more of the blue symbol. If you don't have that, you're getting literally no benefit from that perk. Sometimes it's going to require, 4 or less, or 5 or more, or 5 or less. They're all over the place. But make sure if you are going for those certain perks, you have to activate them or else they're just wasted. Now keep in mind, there's another kind of perk that's in between passive and active. Instead of requiring a certain stat to activate, it requires you to use a certain weapon type, like this perk here with Berserk. If you're using an LMG, no bonus. You need to be using something like an assault rifle. I would actually recommend, because of its versatility, 1 passive perk, because they do have great effects on gameplay, which we'll talk about, and the rest stats. With, of course, some exceptions. Now, let's get started here by going over the stats that can come with armor and talk about the best ones to be looking for. Now, please keep a couple things in mind. These are my opinions coming from my playstyle. What you prioritize might change a little bit depending on the build you're going for. However, I still feel like there are so many universal truths and pitfalls to avoid. Also, although we're looking at high-end gear, this does apply to lower rarities as well, just not as drastically. Okay, so when you're looking for offensive stats, you want to do more damage, what kinds of things are you looking for? Well, on a baseline, weapon damage is just the simplest, easiest thing to go for. If you see like weapon damage plus 8%, that will always be good. You will straight up just do 8% more damage, and that's great. However, because it's so universal and its versatility is really the key important factor here, you're not going to get as drastic of bonuses as you can get with some other stats. You'll often find things like headshot damage having a larger bonus than weapon damage. Crit chance and crit damage as well often have pretty high bonuses. But something that I think a lot of people undervalue, and this can spawn with incredibly high bonuses and has a great effect universally, is damage to elites. As you can see here, I actually have a piece of armor with plus 36% damage to elites. That's might as well just say weapon damage plus 36%, which if it did would be absurd because elites are really what you're focusing on in most engagements. Well, most important engagements when you actually want your damage to matter. Elites are going to be things like gold bar enemies, and they're all over the place in the world tiers. If you're anywhere near the end game, damage to elites is super important. But even if you're still leveling up, the biggest, baddest guys that give you the most problem, well, that is when this stat is going to come up. So it's very, very useful. Another stat to prioritize is headshot damage. Again, it usually comes in greater bonuses than something like weapon damage, and most gunfights consist of you landing a lot of headshots. It's just going to greatly increase your damage output with anything you're using pretty much. Now, in terms of some pitfalls to avoid, number one, gun type specific damage. These stats will spawn on your gloves, but you can also find them in mods, and they're pretty common as brand set bonuses. You can often find LMGs plus 10% damage, and while that's fantastic when you're actually using an LMG, if you're in the process of leveling up, if you're not at World Tier 4 with a great LMG, that can be a hindrance as well, because again, if you're not using LMG, you might as well say plus 0% damage. So just keep that in mind. When you're leveling, prioritize things that are more versatile, like weapon damage, headshot damage, etc., not gun type specific damage. However, another thing that basically falls into this exact category is crit chance and crit damage. Now, why is that? Well, it's because only certain weapon types can really get the most out of crit hit chance and crit hit damage. SMGs do a ton of critical hits. Assault rifles, not so much. LMGs, not so much. Rifles do. So treat crit hit damage almost like SMG damage, right? Because those are guns that are really going to take advantage of this. If you just up crit damage a ton, yes, assault rifles will still get a benefit, but nowhere near as much as other gun types. So that should be treated as if it's just a gun type specific reward, and it really depends on what you're using. And again, don't prioritize it if you're still leveling and replacing gear all the time. But weapon stats are not the only place to find these benefits. Often, passive perks will increase the same exact factors. So we have a perk here that increases weapon damage by 5%. Great. And like I said, with the bigger values, we have another perk for headshot damage, except it's increased by 15%. As long as you're hitting your headshots consistently, if you're using a more accurate weapon like an assault rifle, definitely go for the headshot damage. It's just such a bigger number. If you're using close range guns, if you're using something like an SMG where it can be hard to hit consistent headshots at medium-ish range, yeah, the weapon damage is actually going to be better. Now, like we said before, with elite damage, you also have passive perks like this one. Elite damage plus 15%. Another great one, and in a lot of scenarios, better than the headshot damage, because this is basically a universal damage increase anytime you're fighting a gold bar, which is, again, all the time, at least in the end game. And if you're going for a critical hit build, you have skills like this, which increase your critical hit chance by 8%. Now, as a general rule, I would say between critical hit damage or critical hit chance, which one should you choose? Frankly, both are good. You're going to want both when you're going for a critical hit build. But if you are using a weapon that isn't prone to critical hits, like an assault rifle, prioritize the chance, because then you just want to hit them more often. If you're using something like an SMG that's already consistently hitting criticals, go for damage. You'll often find bigger bonuses like 17-20% bonuses for damage if you go through that department as well. Now, one more perk to absolutely prioritize is Berserk. 10% more damage for every 10% of your armor missing. Often, you can sit near the back of the engagement and have around 50% of your armor left, be doing 50% more damage all the time. Whenever you get in a 1v1 gunfight, you're shooting and being shot at. Your damage is going to increase and increase and increase as that gunfight goes on. It's a really fantastic perk. And lastly, in terms of offensive things you're looking for branding set bonuses, basically everything we talked about earlier applies again. You have great bonuses to damage to elites in some case. You have specific weapon bonuses for assault rifles, etc. Those only matter if you're using them. You have critical hit bonuses. Here actually, critical hit, because it is universal, often it is going to be better than like SMG damage, because again, you might not be using an SMG. But yeah, branding is basically doubling down on the stats you already want. Alright, now moving on from there, from offensive stats to now defensive stats you want to look for, this is key. This is huge. There's a big difference between armor and health. And frankly, armor is really, really good, and health, in my opinion, is kind of a waste. Now, that's not to say that you shouldn't invest anything in health, but essentially, how that system works in the Division 2 is that the segmented little bar is your armor bar. Now, just below that, you have your health bar. So the armor has to completely go away, and then you're going to start getting hit within your health. So in most gunfights, you're just dealing with armor. Your armor's getting hit, you're repairing your armor with things like skills and even your armor repair ability that you always have access to. So if you invest heavily in health on kill, that's totally wasted unless you've lost all your armor at one point and then got hit for health damage. And in the majority of gunfights, that's not going to happen that often. What's going to happen very often is just getting hit in your armor, repairing your armor back to full, getting hit again in your armor. So health, I really don't think it's worth investing a ton in. Armor is really, really what you want. And if you can find armor on kill, that is really fantastic. You'll notice that so much more. It's going to be so much more useful than health on kill. So prioritize armor bonuses, and again, armor on kill. Now, armor on kill, really hard to find. You'll sometimes find some armor regeneration on mods, but really it's a set bonus for one of the brands. That is really, really an important thing to achieve. And that's kind of it. There's only 3 defensive stats that you're playing around with: health, health on kill, and bonus armor. So bonus armor by far being the one you should prioritize. Health definitely isn't that bad, but health on kill I really don't find to be very useful. Now, in terms of some defensive perks you should prioritize, armor plus 10% is fantastic, just a passive perk that's going to give you a big boost. One that really isn't too bad is self-adjusting plus 20% armor regeneration. Now, this is not going to come up in a gunfight. You're not just going to gain a massive amount of armor regeneration passively, but if you're using a skill that regenerates your armor, it will actually impact that. So it's definitely not that bad, but it's also not insane. Health bonuses, again, like we've talked about, they're not that good. Now, increasing your overall health, not that bad, but I would avoid health on kill, to be honest. Something that really isn't that bad is hazard avoidance. But you can frankly completely ignore perks like that if you just have a weapon with the talent that lets you roll and get rid of your status effect. On fire, roll, you're not on fire anymore. And that's going to make all of those hazard resistance things completely pointless. Now, something else to actually prioritize, and this is going to come up more as a set bonus, but that is damage from elites and protection from elites. Elites are gonna rip you up quite a bit. And again, as you move more into the end game, the majority of enemies you face are actually elite enemies. So reducing their oncoming damage might as well just be a straight damage reduction. And so those are actually pretty good as well. And lastly, if you are going for a tank build and you're loading up on a ton of armor, a ton of these bonuses, something you're probably going to want to go for is the perk Unstoppable Force. Killing an enemy grants 2% weapon damage for every 10,000 max armor. I'm not even going for armor that much, and frankly I should spec a little bit more into armor, but I have over 150,000 armor. So I would be getting a 30% damage increase just for activating this perk. That is really, really good. And again, if you're speccing fully into armor and you can get a 40% or more increase, like this is a very, very desirable perk you need to go for, or else your tank build won't be able to output enough damage to warrant being a tank. Now, moving on from there, our last section is skills. What should you prioritize when you want a skill-focused build? Well, there's only 2 stats you need to know about, and that is skill power and cooldown reduction. And skill power is going to be the one that you honestly really want to focus on, with some exceptions. Skill power is just going to increase the potency of your skills. And something I think a lot of people overlook, even myself with my current build, I would love more skill power because healing skills are affected by skill power. If you have more skill power, they will heal you quicker, and that is super, super important. So even your complete damage glass cannon build, you probably want to squeeze a little bit of skill power out just to stay alive. Now, cooldown reduction, that is only if you're specifically using skills that you want to use in quick succession. Stuff like explosive mines, you want to use those and have them recharge almost immediately so you can use them again. If using something like a turret, cooldown reduction, although it's definitely going to come up, you're probably better with skill power to increase its lethality, because cooldown reduction, it's going to stay up for quite a while, especially if you spec into skill power, and that means you could fight an entire gunfight and still have your turret up. And then you take it down, and then it recharges before your next gunfight. Your cooldown reduction is essentially, not a problem. It solves itself. So cooldown reduction, again, is for skills that are one-and-done usage that you want to use and then get them back right away and use them again. Not for things that stick around for a long time. Now, in terms of some great talents to prioritize, we have Empowered plus 10% skill power. Again, people are going to sleep on this, but it basically says plus 10% healing from your healing skills, so don't forget that. Something that's kind of a trap is a perk like this, plus 20% skill duration. You might be thinking, oh my goodness, my turret is going to last so long, but in most gunfights, it's either going to last pretty long already, or it's going to be destroyed by enemies, and so this perk is totally useless. I would rather have skill power, honestly. There's definitely some other great talents out there, but that really depends on your build, and what also depends on your build is your set bonuses for your brands, because a lot of the time they're going to increase specific skills. Drone power increase. Well, that works the same way as SMG damage. If you're not using it, don't bother, and you probably want to go instead, especially again if you're leveling up, if you're changing things all the time, you probably want to go with something like skill power or even a cooldown reduction that's going to help you across the board. And the last thing I want to touch on is use your dang mods. You are going to be getting a lot of mods in the game. It's important to keep equipping them to whatever you're using at the time, keep unequipping them to stuff that you aren't using anymore, and to constantly search for better ones. An offensive mod from a long time ago might have weapon damage plus 0.5%. A newer one might have weapon damage plus 2%. That's a pretty noticeable increase, and that's something, again, that isn't really going to impact you that much for just putting one mod on. But if you look at your overall stats with no mods, and then you put like 5 on, you could gain something like 5% more weapon damage, a bunch more armor. Armor regeneration per second is something that you find on mods and don't often find anywhere else. So mods are something that you should just be aware of and keep putting them on your stuff. And guys, that is it for the video. I really want to thank especially those of you who stuck around through the entire thing. There was a lot to go over, but that's because the Division 2's armor system is so in-depth. And hopefully this video will help you make your build more pungent, more lethal, whatever you are going for. Guys, again, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you want to see more Division 2 content, be sure to slap that subscribe button. If you guys want to get in touch with me and keep up to date with the latest channel activity, the best way is to follow me on Twitter at RickCacus. That's linked in the description down below. Again, I hope you enjoyed the video, and as always, have a good day.